Hello, welcome everyone. We are here for Manifesting Healing Monday. Thank you for joining. And I have my guest here, Dr. TK. I'm going to wave to her and see. And we have Dr. Phillips here. Okay.
Hey,
Hello, TK.
hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm like trying to scoot back. Okay.
I'm so glad you are here to join us today.
Yes.
And I'm just waving at people as they're joining.
Okay.
So, as I mentioned before, this is Manifesting Healing Monday. Thank you for joining. We are talking about Black women and workplace bullying. This is
hmm
part two. Every week, the month of October, and actually going into November, we're going to be talking about Black women and workplace bullying because it's such a pervasive issue. And we're seeing so many people talking about experiencing workplace bullying, and we know that it can have a significant impact on your physical and mental health. So we are here today with our special guest, Dr. TK, to talk about how do we manifest healing in relation to workplace bullying. So
hmm
I'm going to have our wonderful guest introduce herself, and
Okay.
then we are going to move on to introductions. I do want to say she is my business coach, so I can definitely vouch for her. So I'll hand it over to you.
So, hey, everybody. Happy Monday. So, my name is Dr. TK. I am a licensed clinical psychologist located in Southern California. I'm also the number one therapist business coach in which I help therapists manifest profitable mental health businesses, whether that be to grow or open a private practice or revamp one, and or how to scale and add profitable streams of income as a mental health therapist. So, hey.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. And I can attest, to her expertise and, ways that she really helps therapists change our mind frame, our mindset, in terms of having this framework of abundance. So I want to thank you for all you've done for me and for my accountability partners and team and
Yes.
group. So I want to just kind of dive right in, right? So I talked about, how workplace bullying can have an impact on our mental and physical health.
hmm
And unfortunately, we're seeing workplace bullying happen more frequently for Black women, right?
hmm
So, can you just share just a little bit, with the listeners, what were some of your experiences of workplace bullying?
Yeah, so some of it, of course, started in grad school, and then it extended into when I was in internship, just some experiences around, um, I don't even know how to sugarcoat this, so I'm not. And so, like, there were experiences of people not acknowledging that there is, for example, a cultural difference as to why, for example, some clients want to see some people over others. Clients have
Right.
their preference. And some
Absolutely.
people were not educated, even to me, on a low level of cultural competency of how
Mm-hmm.
to, I'm talking about my colleagues, of how
Mm-hmm.
to consult with me appropriately to talk about, for example, why we need to switch cases or why I need to take a client off their caseload culturally,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Right.
I was like, is it because they Black? You know what I'm saying? And so that was like one example
Call
because
it,
what
call
ended up
it thing,
happening,
thing, right?
yeah, because what ended up happening
Uh-huh.
is that person would then go and make a complaint about myself, which would happen in one instance to the supervisor because I was questioning why they were giving me that referral because I just wanted that person
Yeah.
to acknowledge why they were sending me the referral. So that was
Right.
like one first experience, and then more bigger experiences that I'm going to say really slapped me in the face
Mm-hmm.
emotionally is when I was working in the juvenile facility. I
Mm-hmm.
remember being moved. I chose to move from the camp into the halls, which is kind of backwards in the system.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my the main director of the program, she was at LCSW.
Mm-hmm.
And she introduced me to all the probation, all the psychiatrists as
Mm-hmm.
Takesha. And I thought it was very interesting because she would introduce all the psychiatrists, which are typically like white males. She
Mm-hmm.
would introduce them to our team as the doctors. And so I
Right.
questioned it to like another team member because I didn't want to question the director.
Right.
And the feedback that I got is it's just probably that person's ego. We're all
Mm.
known by our first name, and she only sees the doctors as the psychiatrist, not the psychologist. And I thought that that was
Wow.
very interesting. And that unfolded into one of the reasons why I left the county. Not that, but just
Yeah.
how she did not treat her team members appropriately and not
Yeah.
recognizing that she was part of the problem.
Exactly. So not recognizing that you all have professional expertise and
Yeah.
just calling you and speaking to you in just a very like common kind of way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of, because you told me a bit about what's happened. So that kind of carried over in terms of other types of behaviors, right? In terms of what you experienced and what ultimately got to you to the point where it's like, this is not acceptable, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what were some of the things that you were like, okay, I'm thinking this is bullying, and
Yeah.
what kind of things were happening?
Yeah, so some of it was more around, I'm going to say, she was hiding to me, if we're going to call it bullying, she was hiding behind micromanagement. So
Mm,
some of the tasks, so let me back up, let me give some context to those viewers and listeners. Um, I do not throw shade at people who are in a supervisory role and they have never worked in the facility in which they're supervising people. Like everybody gets promoted for a various reason.
mhm.
However, you should go outside your office and see what it's like to work in the field, to work with certain
Right.
populations. And so over time, with my short period there, she did not try, as much as we tried to give her feedback, she did not try to adjust the way that she would talk at us versus to us.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying us meaning all people of color, it was anybody, at this
Wow.
point.
Across the
But she would
board.
talk at us. She would what do you call it? I've been out of the workplace so long. Do the CC thing. I really despise when you're trying to give me constructive feedback based off something that you saw. And instead
Hmm.
of you emailing me or maybe even just CCing my immediate supervisor, you
Hmm.
CC all the supervisors,
Oh my God.
probation, and all the therapists, right? And
Wow.
and
Like
she
public
did that with everybody.
humiliation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't want everybody in my business. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
just walk over to my office.
Right. 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 So that is like kind of like this public shaming in some way, right?
Hmm.
So she would
Hmm.
do that. She didn't seem to have that much familiarity with the population she was working with. So it's all these different things, right? So if you could just share with the listeners, what was that moment that you were like, I'm done? Like,
Hmm.
like we
Hmm.
have different signs and symptoms. All of us experience different things, right?
Yeah.
But what was that moment you were like, I'm done?
Yeah, so it was a buildup. I was only at that site the first time for 6 months. The first inch of something is wrong is shutting myself in my office on the third week of being in the facility and breaking down crying in my office. That was the first
Wow.
red flag, right? If we're talking
Yeah.
about red flags. And
Yeah.
then other red flags that developed over time was nauseated. I remember my house was 10 minutes away from the facility, having to pull over and vomit on the side of the freeway, knowing I'm not pregnant, nothing else is wrong. And every
Wow.
time I went to the doctor, 3 times, they told me it might be stress related. But I did not connect it to my job because outside of her, I actually loved what I did. I still love that
Mm,
population and I love working with
right.
probation. So
Yeah.
then I started getting tension headaches. And what I started noticing was that they would stop when I got in my car when I was on my way home. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
It's
Right.
situational.
So, right. So I wanted to lead up because I also, if other mental health providers are watching or listening, your body will tell you when you've had enough even
Hmm.
before you are able to acknowledge that you've had enough. And I tried to ignore
Hmm.
it. So my body, I believe, gave out on me. And at
Right.
4 or 5 o'clock in the morning on a day I was supposed to go to work, I woke up with a piercing scream and I started crying. And well, no, I didn't take that back. I screamed when I got downstairs. So, because I did not want to wake up my now husband, but fiance. So I ran downstairs, and you would have thought somebody had died in my family. How hard I
Wow.
was crying, um,
Yeah.
and that to me was like something needs to be done.
This is not right. This is not right. Right. So many times as Black women, we keep going, especially when we love the work we do. Because you're like, oh, well, that part I don't like, but I love the work that I do. And so we'll just keep going and going and going, even though you said there were multiple signs, but you just
Mm-hmm.
kept going, kept going, kept going. But
Mm-hmm.
that time you had that piercing cry out, that was like a true warning sign to you, like, mm-mm, this
Mm-hmm.
is not okay. This is
Mm-hmm.
not okay. And
Mm-hmm.
then can you share with us what happened then? So
Yeah.
once you came to the realization, like, mm-mm, this is not okay for me,
Mm-hmm.
what happened then?
So I feel like with divine timing, I got the right therapist. And so at home, I called, I was trying to call around because I had knew about EAP services because I had a private
Mm,
practice. So I'm like, I need an EAP provider, just someone, because I had heard Kaiser at the time was not, they were just pushing people into groups. And so I'm like, no, I need to
mm,
speak to somebody one-on-one. So I
right.
ended up getting an intake like that Monday. So I told them I was taking off work or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to go see a therapist at Kaiser that Monday because I believe that happened on a Saturday. So
Mm,
when I got into the office, it was a Caucasian, in his 30s, like therapist.
mm-hmm.
And I was kind of guarded into telling people what happened because mental health is a very small world, especially
Yeah.
within LA County Department of Mental Health,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to get blackballed. And so
Right.
I started telling him around and about what was happening. And he was like,
Mm-hmm.
what facility do you work in? And I'm like, why? He was like, I used to work in one, just curious. And I told him the name of it. And he was like, oh, yeah, that's the one I used to work at. So speed things up. Within the first 5 minutes, he ended up telling me that that is the reason she is because he asked me for her name. And I'm like, who are you? Because I was a little paranoid. And he was like, no, I was a therapist there. And a lot of us left when she
Wow.
started in a short period of time because
Mm.
what you're telling me was what we saw in the first few weeks. And I'm like, well, she's still there. You know what I'm saying?
You
Like,
know
clearly
something?
nothing is being changed.
Yeah.
And so he ended up, he told me actually, if I want to, I can tell him more, but there's no need because he already knew. And I was like, oh my God. So I went ahead and told him my story. And then he took me off work for
Yeah.
7 days. I took that 7 days to reflect on, I have my own business. Do I really need to, go back to work? I've been
Mm-hmm.
wanting to leave, but this was a lot earlier than anticipated. So that fear
Mm-hmm.
was inside of me too.
Right.
Student loans, home mortgage, all those things.
Yeah.
And then I did go to the anxiety group. And as a
Mm.
therapist, I'm listening to it, and I said, "Well, this is good tools for my client, for my clients. Let me go ahead and take this workbook, But they didn't have availability for individual therapy at that time. But
Mm.
I took the time out on my own to really process what I wanted, and that job was not it.
Yes. 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 So it allowed for time for reflection, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
also appreciate that you said that you recognized as a mental health professional that you needed help.
Yeah.
So particularly, when you were Black women, we're taught to go, go, go. And then
Mm-hmm.
we're mental health professionals. We're like, oh, I got the skills. I can do this. I can. But no, sometimes we need help too. And just
Right.
say, I need help and go to get the help. And then the
Mm-hmm.
other part you talked about, which is very interesting, that I think it's important for us to discuss when we think about workplace bullying, is the system, right?
Yes.
So it's maybe one bully, right? But the system protects the bully. So it becomes like this toxic
I'm
work
like, oh.
environment. What was that response?
No, I'm laughing because I had a picture that popped in my head about how the system bullies the rest of the situation.
Yes,
So,
yes, yes. So either they are aware of what's going on with the bully, and they're kind of like, oh, well, right, 'cause they don't want to go back and forth with the person, but they're being complicit and allowing the bullying to go on. As you said, this gentleman you talked to, he had experienced it, and the whole team had experienced it. So just think about how many people have been injured by this one person,
mm-hmm,
right? And the system never stepped up to really do anything about it. So then
mm-hmm,
that allows it to perpetuate, as we
right.
know about bullying behaviors. So you started talking about ways that you have manifested healing in the sense of, you know what, I took some time off. I said, this is not for me. I need
Mm-hmm.
to move up the timeline from when I'm leaving, right? So tell us a little bit more about ways that you manifested healing in relation to that experience.
Yeah, so one of the things that I recognized when I first went to that group is that I liked how they were talking about meditation because I had never honestly done real meditation, but I said, you know
Hmm.
what, let me try it out. At the time, I'm really living by my house by myself, and so I really have the opportunity and enough space to just do nothing but process like what happened. And so I got into, I've always been a journaler and a vision board person. So I really sat down and thought about what would my life be like if I did not go back to the job. And then during that time, logistically, I mean, I'm a strategies person. So the processing didn't stay that long because the process made me start making phone calls because I need to see action, especially if I only have 7 days off. I don't want to go back if I don't have to. So I just started making phone calls to look at things that need to be in place in order for me to feel okay to leave and not cause another panic attack. And when I saw the numbers, and I also honestly saw how resilient I've been even before this job, just being a Black woman from Compton and just experiencing just a whole lot of stuff, you know, from growing up to now or then. I realized that I'm unstoppable, and the only real person that stopped me even from leaving this job before the panic attack was me. And so let me go ahead and put in my papers, and I did. I took that leave off, and then I emailed them the day before I was supposed to come back and said, I ain't coming back.
Wow. So you took full advantage that week. You were busy.
Yeah,
you
that's
were busy.
Yes, 7 days.
Wow. Wow. And I think what happens sometimes when people take a leave, they're so burnt out by that point, or they're so overwhelmed, depressed, or whatever. They're just literally in the bed, or, you know, they're just wiped out. So even though it was just like the disappointment, and that's a lot of times it happens when we think about jobs and we think about the disappointment, we also think about the grief. Right? Yeah. So you loved working with that population. So it was part of the grief of this job did not turn out like I thought it was going to be. Right. You know, I will no longer be working with these kids. So there was some grief involved in it as well. Yes. But you recognize for your own self-preservation, I got to go.
Well, also just being an ideal generator, I just asked myself, how can I see more of these people in my private practice? So that was the pivot. And my mindset is like, it wasn't like I didn't have, truth be told, those type of kids in my practice. The only difference between the kids I had and the kids in jail is that the kids I had in my practice didn't get caught. You know what I'm saying? Like, they just had affluent systems to take care of things, because some of them were in the court system, but they never went to jail or stayed in jail past one night. Right. And so the tool still worked. I just had to pivot with really honing in on, let me go into the high schools, let me go to the community colleges and get kids that still meet the same characteristics of the kids in jail, but they're just not in the facility.
Absolutely, right? So knowing that there's other ways to serve those who you want to serve, we just have to sometimes like think broader and not just think that only within certain systems we can see the kids we want to work with. Right. And are there any other things that you did, or any other things that helped you through that process? Because you did a lot of strategic stuff, right? So what helped you?
Connection, relationship was one. Throughout that time, I know what protected me the entire time is also not feeding into other people's hostility and toxicity within the work setting. So I'm an observer. I am a social person, but I'm also an observer in new settings. And every time that I've switched sites, or even going back to internship, I've always learned, like, the first 48 hours, watch people. It doesn't mean you don't talk. It doesn't mean you don't engage, but watch, see who's honestly bickering and complaining. And what I noticed on the first day of lunch, they were talking about foul grievances about this woman. You know, I'm like, oh my God, like, what did I transfer into? Nobody told me this. And so after the first 48 hours, I feel like I also lasted that long with, like, the 6 months that I was there. Because I either, and this was not good though, I might add, but it was the best, is I ate in my office for lunch, or I ate with the kids or probation. I made sure that I took walks in between my clients. I did not lock myself in a jail cell, because my office was a jail cell, you know. And then I made sure to talk to probation at least about life versus just our work at jail. So, and then of course I had, I have a good a good psychologist friend, Dr. Rochelle, in which she's worked in the facility. So we talked about the daunting part about working in a dark place where these kids come back over and over again. So what I'm getting at is community is really important. And then also understanding the dynamics of your work setting. You will fool yourself if you get wallowed up in other people's grievances, because you're not going to make it.
Right. It's like you're talking about protecting your space. So
Yes.
even though the space is toxic, you still carved out your own space within that space. And
Right.
then you try to kind of change the dialogue, the direction, the negativity,
Mhm.
when you would have exchanges with people, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you had your community, outside of work.
Right.
Many times people become so immersed in their work and they work, 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 and that's all they have. It's just work.
Hmm.
And then their identity gets wrapped up in work, and then it becomes like so devastating when things don't work out, right? And so you got everything together, you pivoted, and so then you left after the 7 days?
Yeah. Yeah. I left and then I dove straight into my private practice. At the time, I had a sprained ankle. Don't ask me how I got that. I was working out at home, failed. But nevertheless, I'm just pointing out that all these things were going wrong. And then I
Okay.
was also planning a Hollywood wedding. So after all that, but within 30
Yes.
days, I filled up my caseload and I made my first 10K month. So I'm just throwing out
Wow.
numbers to
In a
show
month.
people, yeah, 30 days. You just got to be focused. Focused.
Wow. Yes. 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 And I think it's important for people to know that it is possible. It
Hmm.
is possible. And so
Yeah.
you just kept going and then you just grew from there, right?
Hmm.
So
Yep.
I'm wondering if you could just tell the listeners just a little bit of what I already know, but just a little bit about your business, what you do, how to get in contact with you, all that.
Hmm. Yeah. So I want to add one more thing though, if I can, because I feel
Sure.
like there is a watcher or listener that either may be in fear that when they, for example, leave their job, if they're experiencing work, workplace bullying or something else that's toxic for them,
Hmm.
that they may be in fear that they will have to go back. So when I
Uh,
left that job and then got married, about 6 to 8 months later, I decided to go back. And it was part of a negative side of my ego telling me, you need to go back for stability, knowing doggone well, I just created all this stability for myself. But I started to get in my
right.
own head again. And so I lasted
Mm,
all but 43 days, but that's beside the point because the message was, unfortunately, I had to go back to show myself that I did not need that job. And I was just honestly
mm,
reminded of what had happened the first time very quickly in a shorter window. So
wow.
be confident in yourself when you choose to detach from a workplace, transfer to another workplace, or get your own business, because the
Hmm.
only person that could prevent your growth is yourself. You can't externalize the
Right.
blame to someone else. Period.
Right. Right.
You know.
So when you said that you went back, it was like that fear. It's like fear driven, right? Like, oh my God, I need to go back. I need to, even though all the data was showing you were doing well on your own.
Mhm.
And
So
so,
student loans
uh-huh.
happened. That's what happened.
Ah, that's very important. That's
Yes, ma'am.
very important. Yes, yes, yes. That's real talk. Real talk. So during that 43 days, when did you know within that 43-day window that this was not
I'm
a good
sorry.
idea?
You bring it back some memories. So, when I went back on the first day, my main supervisor, not the lady, but the guy main supervisor, he said, "Get in my office." I felt like I was one of the kids. And I was like, "Yes." He said, "Why are you back here?" All the therapists that were looking for an exit, but a lot of them stayed because of, what do you call that, seniority with schedules, like they were
Mm,
just complacent. But they
mm,
knew that I had had an individual practice, that I also had interns going into a group practice. So they were like, "I don't understand why you're here." And that was a red
right.
flag because I was like, "Oh, they questioning me," you know? And then when I got there, in summary, there was a lot of shuffling around because there was a high turnover rate, go figure. So
Right.
with the turnover rate, with therapists leaving back to back, she needed coverage in certain units. And let's just say it wasn't well planned out to the point where probation got involved. Probation stepped into my office and started asking me a whole lot of questions to put me in a very uncomfortable position. It put me in a
Mm,
position where a lot of people didn't like me because of some replacements of therapists and thinking that I was replacing certain therapists. And it just got really nasty to the point where I was told, in summary, I bet by another black head probation officer, she said, "You better watch your back. Because from what I've been told about you being a very good therapist, but you ain't in these meetings, your ASS is about to get thrown under the bus if anything that you're over with these kids falls through the cracks." Because what
oh
they did
my
is they put
God.
me over the highest risk kids, which are in the
Mm,
hole. And so, with all that being said, I quickly made a phone call. I'm a shifter and I'm a strategist. And so I made a phone call to a place that considered to hire me as a clinical supervisor, just part-time. I was like, I just need
Hmm.
some, I love
Right.
supervision. I love teaching. And so I said, do I get benefits? With like 20 hours a week. And they said, yes. I said, tell me when I can start and I'm out. so, so I put in my 2-week notice again. And I was like, I'm out. And my
Wow.
supervisor was like, don't come back.
Well, that's the supportive supervisor, right? Because the supervisor could see the greatness in you and could see how well you were doing. It's like,
Mhm.
well, why kind of waste your talent in this place? It's not, this is
Yes. He
not a
still
good fit
follows
for
me on
you.
Facebook. He comments on everything. Like, I'm so proud of you.
Oh, that's dope. That's dope. So you were like, the 2 weeks. Did you make it the 2 weeks, or what was it like that two
I mean,
weeks
it
kind of
wasn't
waiting
all
it
the
out?
way to 2 weeks. I mean, I can't go, well, it's deep on my podcast. I go into a whole podcast about why I left a $130,000 job. But like the events were so severe where it would have been just reckless to my mindset to keep going back into environments where I know people are talking about me. When you hear your name and ain't nobody else in the unit, and I turn around and I say, did somebody say my name? And they like, mm-mm. But they get real quiet. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, y'all talking about? And they weren't talking
Yes.
about me as a person. They were just talking about some of the events that occurred. And unfortunately, I had to replace certain people that they had been used to for 5 to 10 years in units. They
Wow.
weren't fond of that decision. And so
Of course not.
all that was projected onto the person that was there, which happened to be me,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, okay, so now that you've shared what a journey that has been,
Yes.
right? So tell us how you ended up where you are now and what
Mhm.
you're doing and how you're helping so many other people in the process.
Yes. So it actually happened when I was working in the county. When I started growing my private practice part time, I had no coach, had no idea what I was, no systems, nothing. But I learned from my experiences. And what started happening organically for 5 years, from 2012 until 2000, actually more than that, until like 2018, 19. My coaching services weren't even called coaching services. I was just getting on the phone, known as a consultation, like you do in private practice, because
Mm-hmm,
one of my interns worked at the jail and
mm-hmm,
she would just have conversations to her colleagues about what she was doing on her days off. And they were like, who is this person? How do you know all this stuff about private practice? We don't get taught that. And so she started texting me while she was at work and saying, hey, can this psychologist person call you? Can this therapist person call you? And that's how I started getting referrals. And initially it was just conversations. And then somebody finally asked, like, how much I gotta pay you just to like teach me all this? And I'm like, pay me. Still didn't see myself as a business coach. I just saw myself as
wow.
I'm a teacher. I've been a professor for over
Yes,
17 years. And
yes.
so that grew for a few years behind closed doors, as
Mm-hmm,
they called. And I was known,
mm-hmm,
I called myself the county bandit because I started teaching people how to lead a county. And then things kind of blew up when I finally left because someone had also said, why don't you start talking on Facebook and Instagram about what you do? And I'm like, people want to hear it. And they said, yes. And so from
absolutely.
there, yeah, I just start talking about it, start doing more consultations known as strategy calls. And then I started having one-on-one clients for private practice. And then all of a sudden, I start learning more, growing my business, scaling my business. And one thing I will say that I think is very important for a therapist and or a coach, is anybody in
Mm-hmm,
business, is that this is just my suggestion. You definitely want to go through your own process and work out the kinks and make sure that what you're learning works for you first
mm,
before you go and try to teach it to someone else. That is really
absolutely.
important. So, and I think that's
Mm-hmm,
why I didn't take it public or even why I didn't talk about it a lot. But now I have a
mm,
full system for like 3 different levels of programs plus other
yes,
things, you know?
yes, yes. And can you just briefly describe the difference between coaching and therapy? Because people get that confused sometimes.
Yes. So the simplistic layman's terms, like definition is, I'm going to say point A to B. So therapy is for people who are exploring their baggage. They're trying to figure out why they are the way they are. Maybe they have
Mm-hmm.
some mental health symptomology, but they're trying to get functional. Nobody is 100% functional. Like at an A, we're just trying to get to 70 and stay cool, right? But then coaching comes into play on the part B where, okay, now I'm functional. I got, some tools, but now I really want to focus on my 5-year plan. I want to
Mm,
focus on my career and where I want my career to go. But you can't,
mhm.
some people try to do it, but then they wonder why it doesn't work. And it's because you're preoccupied mentally with all this baggage that's happening at your house with your kids, with your past and trauma. And so you need
Right.
to process part A before getting part B. And if you find a therapist who offers both and the therapist tells you as a potential client, it is suggested that you go and find the A. I can be your A, or you can find someone else. As the client, you need to say okay, because you're going to be wasting your money in coaching.
Yes. Yes, because you're not able to follow through with stuff. You can't really hear stuff, right? Because you're dealing with your stuff.
Right.
So sometimes it might be more appropriate for people to go into therapy first and then coaching, right? But to be very clear that a coach is not the same thing as a therapist. You happen to be a therapist, right?
Yes.
But it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And so I'm wondering also before we get off, if you can also just share with them the levels of services that you offer also and how people can get in contact with you.
Yeah, so what I've done, my mission has become a lot bigger. I used to talk a lot about mental health, but then I realized during the pandemic last year that there was a bigger mission to make sure that this is what was spoke and downloaded to me as a person through my spiritual power, God. And so I was told that if I have all of these strategies and things to pour into other people, don't be stingy, and instead of you just building a client caseload of 20 people on your own, why don't you help 20, hundreds, and thousands of other therapists build their own 20 to 30 person caseload? And so I'm giving that context because I'm no longer accepting therapy clients. And I have to say that because some people will DM me and I have to tell them, like, I have a community, but I don't see clients right now because I'm really invested in either, I'm gonna say the lowest level is podcasts. That's free content. You can go to Dr. TK. And we feature those on my Instagram too. Then I have the Dope Therapist Academy, which we've done for the year, but we're vamping up for next year throughout the whole year. That is if you are brand new to private practice or you need to revamp your system. Because most therapists, and you know this, we roll out of bed and just say, we're going to have a private practice today. Like, I'm going to write a note and that's it. So I help you build the foundational system so that you can live life abundantly. And then from there, students can have a desire to want to have streams of income. I teach therapists how to have streams of income easily and effortlessly. And what I mean by that is it's still hard work, but why try to have 7 different businesses when you can create 7 different products for the same type of client, but you could be known as global versus just your zip code. So I have a mastermind program to teach therapists how to scale.
Yes. And as you say, sleep, making money as you sleep too, right?
Yes.
With those various streams of income.
Go from 1 to 1, because therapy is 1 to 1 unless it's a group, to 1 to many. And our impact, I believe, is to eventually serve 1 to many over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to say thank you just publicly, for all that you've done to support me and help me in terms of changing my mindset. But also I'm so proud of the work that you do because it helps to support the healing of our communities on such a larger level, right? Because when we're meeting with clients one-to-one, we can only see so many people one-to-one. But when you're working with all these therapists across the country, you are supporting healing for so many of us. So I'm so very appreciative to you.
Thank you.
And also I want to give a shout out to Dr. Roche, who is also a Black woman psychologist, and she really helps with rethinking money, right? Because I know that was a challenge for me. So there's so many things that we might recognize that we need to grow in. And it's okay to say, I'm struggling with this. Yes. So no matter what it is, if it's therapy, if it's coaching, please, for us to get the support we need. Right. So again, Dr. TK, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Yes. And I would just want to tell the listeners that every month, every Monday in October and going into November, we're going to be having an IG Live talking about Black women and workplace bullying, because unfortunately it's so pervasive. I was just going to do October, and then people were like, no, I want to be on, right? So we're going into November also. So please join us every Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, and 6 p.m. Pacific time. And please reach out to Dr. TK if you are a therapist and you are looking to, expand your private practice or go into other areas to support healing as well. So I want to thank you, Dr. TK, and all you do to manifest healing. Thank you. I want to thank the listeners and have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.